field. There were horses that were still alive. They were not all killed. The spears, some spears were still intact. Charles Martel collected this, and he started forming up his own heavy cavalry. And this is where we start to see the true origins of the medieval knight, his armor, his horses, and his tactics. So really, when you think about it, they came from the Muslims, from Islam, from that era. But the knights took it upon themselves and they advanced it a little bit further. Now, as we move through time, Charles Martel had a son, and that son, Charles Martel's grandson, was Charlemagne. Many of you may have heard of Charlemagne, some may not have, but we'll go over a little bit of him. Charlemagne continued to use these heavy cavalry armored warriors, and they were not yet known as knights. However, through the process, he had to find a way to fund these heavy cavalry classes. Because horses, while not very expensive, their health is extremely sensitive. See, Sam, you know you might get sick one day, right? Might catch a cold. Is it going to be today? Probably not. Is it going to be tomorrow? Probably not. But he's going to get sick sometime or another. Horses' health, even to today, are they going to get sick today? They probably will. They have an extreme high health bill. You had to feed them. You had to take care of them. Horses do not want to be around 20 minutes. They do not want to hear, ah! Screams of midnight. They get very scared. They run away. So you had to learn and you had to train your horse to get used to all of those things. Because a horse did not like that. So you had training, you had health care, you had feeding, you had to house the horses, so you had to have land. So what Charles Martel started to do was he started to give land to these warriors. So these warriors now had land. They had a farmer that was on that land. The farmer would grow the food, sell the food. He would also take care of the cattle, the horses, sheep, and so on.
How often the horses armored or had any sort of protection? So how often the horses armored or had any sort of protection?
A knight's horse would have been more so than not. In the 9th century that we're in right now, and getting to the 15th century, the armor developed. Of course, they had the mail primarily as their armor. But depending on the wealth of the knight, depending if he could fund it or not, he would equip his horse in as much armor as he possibly could. So, how often were they armored? It depended upon the individual owning the land. Did they have enough money to equip their horse in armor? So Charles Martel was given this land, and what this is called is a fief. So this heavy cavalry individual, fully armored, having weapons, being able to fight on horseback in war, now received land from the king. Now he was able to make money from that, fund himself going to battle, and pay the king a certain due every single year. Now, getting into the year 800, the turn of the 9th century, the Catholic religion, the popes were losing their power, were losing their authority with people. The religious leaders were no longer able to have such an influence upon society. So what wound up happening was the Pope needed an authority figure to help give him power. Charlemagne was having a tough time because although he was passing laws, although he was acting as king and had this wonderful army that he was developing, people on the masses were not listening to him as a king, as a commander. So, through the Pope seeking out the cooperation of the king, and the king needed also help to give an education, you could say, to the common people. Through this process, they grew together, and Charlemagne in the year 800, in the turn of the 9th century, became Holy Roman Emperor. Remember, the popes were very strong, they were very influential during the Roman period, during the Roman days. However, getting more so away from that into the time period that we are, into the turn of the 9th century, we wouldn't pay too much attention to them. But now that they had the backing of the king, now that the king had the backing of the religion, now they were able to have more of an influence, more of a control over the people, over common people like you and me. Now, one amazing fact is that through this process, Charlemagne enacted paladins. And paladins were heavily armored individuals. They fought as heavy armored individuals as warriors in battle, and they were his royal bodyguard. So if he was fighting in war, these paladins would be able to assist him. They would fight alongside with him. But then outside of warfare, they also had a social role. If the king was going to make a decision, if Charlemagne was going to make a decision or a policy, then these paladins gave their opinion, gave their input, and helped Charlemagne make a good decision. So they had political influence. They were able to make laws. And through this process, as more and more heavy armored individuals were required, Charlemagne enacted the very first knights in the early 9th century. And knights first started appearing. So they were controlling land. They had a lot of land. They were able to control and have political influence. Charlemagne, being enacted as Holy Roman Emperor, was now sanctioned as having authority from God to do what he did as king. So he had the authority from religion as well. This authority from God was passed on to the knights, and that idea persisted. Everybody had that position, that anybody with authority, with royal authority from the king or an extension of the king's power or arm, had authority from God to do what they wanted to do. And so knights were not just simply warriors on the battlefield. They were socially influential. When religion would pass a law, and the knights knew that law, they would enforce it upon the people. If they saw somebody doing something that was against what religion had taught them to do, the knights would, in essence, make those people obey. They would take their money, their clothing, they would kill them, and do a much number of things. Now, getting into becoming a knight, how do you think you would become a knight? No idea, right? Would you like to volunteer? No? You can volunteer, sure. And I told you I would call on you. And let's see. And you. Okay. Now, you want to volunteer? All right. So during this period, women were not just household ladies. They could become knights. Women were given very much authority. They were not looked as lowly as they did in the 18th, 19th century when all that kind of ideas in society came around. In medieval history, women had a very influential role as well. So if she was a young lady, and let's have you, and then let's have you two guys. So you come over here, and you stand with her. Good. And you stand right here, and face them. And then you stand at the end, please. Yay. All right. So when somebody was a kid growing up to be 8, 9, or 10 years old, up to that point, how old are you? 10? And how old are you? And you? Okay. Then we've set them up very appropriately. So at the age of being a child, grown up to be about 10 years old, a person would be a page. And a page helped in a house. So they would do laundry, they would cook, they would clean, they would take care of animals, they would do normal household things. Now once they got to be about 11 or 12, they started to become a nuisance around the house, right? Started causing a lot of trouble, a lot of man did things they shouldn't. So the women of the house didn't want to take care of them so much. So normally what happened, if I was a knight and I did not have enough money to fund a squire, to fund my son to become a knight, what I would do is I would send him to another house. A knight that was a relative, an uncle, a cousin, or perhaps just a knight that I knew could financially afford to take care of him. Then under that knight's house, they would train them from about 11 or 12 up. They would train them how to fight with the longsword, how to fight with the dagger, getting into the 14th, 15th century, how to fight with a poleaxe, how to ride horses, how to use the lance. They would be trained in war and combat for a minimum of at least about 8 years or more. Then, well, rather as a squire, they would also fill other roles. They would take care of the horses. They would learn how to clean the knight's armor. Armor certainly rusts. It's metal, so it gets old. It gets beaten. So it rusts, it develops, you need to take care of it. It has lots of leather straps. So the squire needed to know how to do minor adjustments.